Hello and welcome to A Flesh and Stars. My name's Mark Flaherty. I'm a consultant astrologer, and I'm joined today by my good friend and fellow astrologer, Cameron Joyner. How are you today, Cam? Good to see you.
I am doing wonderful. I'm excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this for the period of time building up to it. I'm just excited to talk astrology and hang out with my friend.
Great. I'm glad somebody's excited. I feel nervous. That's how I feel. It's a big thing, this for me, to be launching my own podcast. And I really want to do a good job. And you know me as a Virgo, I've been meticulously preparing. And then when it comes to actually recording and I start to think of like people listening and watching, then I get all anxious and nervous. So that's how I am right now. And I'm really glad to be here doing this. You know, I was reading an article recently of how to be a good podcaster. And of all the tips it gave, the number one top tip was be willing to not be very good when you start. And I was like, oh man, that's not what I want to hear. I want it to be perfect. And so here we are. Well, you know, one of the things I love, Cam, is etymology. It's one of my other great loves other than astrology. And as I was preparing for this podcast, I was thinking about, I really want this to be professional. I want to do a good job. I really want to get my love of astrology over to people. And I was reminded of the word amateur and the etymology of that. Because, so many words today, they mean something so different to their actual original meaning, right? And, an amateur these days is like, oh, that guy's an amateur, right? He's not very good at something. He's an amateur. But do you know what it really means? Do you know the original meaning of amateur?
No.
It is from the French, amateur, lover, somebody who does something for the love of it, right?
Oh.
That's what amateur originally meant, somebody who does something for the love of it. So then I was like, all right, I want to be an absolute, total and utter amateur at this podcast. So what I want to begin with is just to briefly explain the format of this podcast series, and then we'll get into the content of this episode. Because there's two distinct kinds of episodes that are going to make up A Flesh and Stars. There are the flesh episodes, which are going to be intimate conversations with some really interesting people I know, talking about themselves and their lives and their work. And then the stars, which are the astrology episodes. And that's what we're starting with today. So the stars episode, why am I doing this? I love astrology, right? Cam, I know you love astrology. I love astrology. And this podcast, I really have this desire to bring astrology alive, bring it to life through personal stories, to bring the humanness back into it. It's astrology for me, what I see, it's really interesting in that so many people know about it these days and know its validity, at least, in the circles I move. And yet I think something's missing. I rarely hear people talk about specific stories and how astrology relates to their own individual life. There's a lot of talk of the sort of more general astrology, which isn't untrue, right? The big picture, Neptune moving into Aries this year, and, all four planets, all four outer planets, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, all changing signs over the last year and this year. It's a real thing and it's a big deal, and you hear a lot about this kind of astrology. But as a earthy, practical Virgo, you know, when I hear that, I find myself saying, so what? Like, so what? As in, and what do I do with that? How do I use that? Astrology can be so powerful, right? So potent in helping us in our everyday lives. And as I see it, is literally guidance from the unseen world to support us in our own unique, individual, actual human lives. And I want to bring that. That's my aim in this podcast series, in the stars episodes, is to tell stories, right? Tell stories and weave the astrology into those stories, because it's stories. We are, as humans, we are storytellers, right? But that's how we're made up. And when we hear stories and when we tell stories, it can touch something in us. It touches into a deeper place in us. We feel it in our bodies. It touches our souls. And a lot of the astrology I hear about stays in the head. You know, this abstract information. Even I've got this big bookshelf of astrology books over there that have great information in them, and there's so few actual astrology charts. You know, it's all this general information. So yeah, I want to bring stories and bring life and humanness into astrology. And I want to explore with you, Cam, and perhaps with other astrologers, what astrology actually is. What are we doing when we engage in astrology? Because I don't think that's talked about or understood enough, even by people who are well versed in the technical side of astrology and practice it and are good astrologers. I think there's something missing in what astrology is and what we're doing, and I want to talk about all of that. So let's talk about you, Cam. I would love, Cam, if you would be willing to introduce yourself to us and anything you feel like sharing with our viewers and listeners about yourself right now, while we also have a little look at your astrology chart, and perhaps you'll share some of the key themes that stand out and how they relate to your life.
Yeah, that sounds great. It'll be hard for me as a Leo to just share a little bit because I could talk about myself all day. But who I am is I just love life. You know, I love going out and exploring and playing with life in a very childlike way. I live in this new housing development, and there's a big tractor that's just kind of it's been left there while they're building other houses. And I was on a walk last night with my wife, and I was like, oh yeah, I went and sat in the tractor. And she was like, you're such a child. Yeah, it's, it's not the kind of thing I would like plan out and figure out. I just saw a tractor and I was like, ooh, in the same way that my daughter sees a toothbrush and it's the most exciting thing in the world. So, but just from the lens of astrology, there's a few things that really kind of dominate my life, and they all show up in astrology. And that, I would say that probably the most prominent thing about me is just that my life is really driven by change. So I had kind of a destructive childhood, and, the greater chunk of my adult years have really been spent trying to heal that, and just trying to take the stuff that was painful inside and just figure out how the heck do I make it less painful. And, from an astrology standpoint, that's that Mars in Scorpio right on the ascendant. In astrology, a planet that's conjunct or on top of the ascendant is really like, it's going to be at the forefront of your entire life. And if I kind of go back through my life, it's been very Mars related. When I was a kid, it was sports. I was very competitive. I played very competitive hockey. I played baseball. I played basketball. I played, I was on a bowling team. And then as I sort of got into my older years, I got into martial arts and And then started getting things like Qigong. And Mars things really dominate my life. A fun little astrology tidbit. The most recent thing that's sort of like come at the forefront of my life is now I have a daughter. So Mars rules my fifth house of children. So like a lot of my time that's not related to work is spent with my daughter. And then even if we look at what I do for a living, like I help men with sexual anxiety, sexual problems. I help them get in touch with sort of their deep emotional challenges and help them take that pain and turn it into a really beautiful experience that helps them heal and enjoy their life.
Yeah, and that's not just Mars, right? With the work and helping men with sexual difficulties, that's Mars in Scorpio, right? And your Scorpio rising as well. So Scorpio, even though you're a Leo, you're very scorpionic too, right? You know, planets, as you say, planets on angles, especially on the ascendant, they can be more prominent even than our sun signs sometimes, can't they? They're like right there at the forefront of our lives.
Yeah, for sure. And it's very interesting that like when I started at my jujitsu school when I was in Vermont, there was a couple guys there who knew just a little bit about astrology, and they were shocked when they found out I was a Leo, because like all they really saw from me was that Scorpio, that Mars. And you know, I've known Mark. I've known you for 10 years. I think at this point, 12. I think it's 12. I think we met in 2014. And like it's really easy for me to be a Leo with you, and also you have your Leo moon. But you know, when I meet new people, I'm a little guarded, and you know, a word that's been described in the past is intense. So yeah, and that's, you know, that's that Scorpio rising. You know, that's the first thing that people see when they meet me is that rising sign.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And I should just say at this point, because I imagine there's people listening to this with a whole variety of astrological knowledge and to say that this podcast is not going to be astrology lessons. So we're going to be touching in and sharing little bits of like astrological wisdom and insight, but it's not going to be like a structured teaching thing. So yeah, just to say, if you are interested in a more structured approach to learning astrology, go check out some of the other teachings around astrology. I have a complete introduction to astrology course on my website, which is a great way in, and you can watch the first episode for free. You get 2 hours of introduction to more structured teaching astrology. I hadn't intended this to be a sales pitch for my course, but there you go.
That's what happens.
More to the point is that, you know, we're going to be diving around, and there's going to be a lot of good astrology in this, and we'll share some explanation, but it's not going to be a deep dive into learning astrology. I just wanted to say that now to make it a bit clearer what we're doing here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah.
Now back to me. There was one other thing that I really wanted to touch on that's kind of at the forefront of my life, or that's a big piece of who I am, which is my relationship. So anybody who knows me, Mark has been around for the entirety of my relationship. Like my wife Jeannie is my whole life. I love the woman. She brings so much joy into my life, and as somebody who spent a very long time, you know, most of my adult life struggling with relationships, which if we look at, you know, that Venus in Leo on the 9th house, I'm very proud of my wife. I love my wife very much. But that Venus squares my Mars and Scorpio on the ascendant, and that caused a lot of problems in my life with relationships. I was very, very bad at relationships for most of my life. I made as many painful mistakes as you could probably make. And then finally, somehow through fortune or luck, or I don't know, a good karma or something, managed to stumble and figure out how to find and marry a wonderful woman like that.
That's really sweet to hear. Well, thank you, Cam, for that's already a lot that you've shared. I really appreciate that. And I notice wanting to just keep talking about you so I don't have to bring up my own chart and talk about myself, because I know that's what's on the plan next. Okay, this was my idea, wasn't it? I'm just remembering.
Yeah.
And what I notice in me, just in the invitation and the thought of sharing my own chart and talking about myself, is some like anxiety and like something in me wants to kind of freeze and like, oh God, don't talk about yourself. And I see that in my chart, right? Like I see Mercury square Saturn in my chart. That's the first thing. That's like, as I start to talk about my own chart, and Mercury is my chart ruler, right? The ruler of my ascendant. So it has extra prominence for me as a Virgo Sun, Virgo rising. And I love talking, actually. I do love talking. I don't particularly like talking about myself. And yeah, I see Mercury square Saturn, Mercury conjunct Pluto. There's like difficulties and challenges in expressing my Mercury, even though it is words and communication is a great joy of mine.
It's also very interesting because you looked at the challenges that come with that, but you didn't pay attention to the fact that your Mercury is sextile your moon.
It's true. And that's because I'm a Virgo and I see problems first. It's like the Virgo is the problem solver, right? And to be a problem solver, you got to have a problem. And so it's certainly true for me. I think it's true for a lot of Virgos. We are wired to see what's wrong. And you're absolutely right. I'm honing in on Mercury conjunct Pluto square Saturn. It's also sextile my moon and very closely trine the midheaven. So, that's actually, and this is a really cool thing, is, so this podcast I really see shown in my chart as the Mercury, firstly because it's in the sign of Libra, right, which is about the other, relating relationships. And all the episodes I'm going to do are going to be me in conversation with somebody else. I like to talk, but not just on my own at a camera. It's in a Libran way. It's with somebody else. It's the relating. And then the moon in Leo in the 11th house is, this is what brings out the Mercury, is communicating with friends, right? The 11th house is the house of friends and friendships. And so that kind of invokes this great moon in Leo, which is a very different side of me to the kind of shy Virgo, which is a part of me and is very strong and true. But there's also this quite outgoing, gregarious moon in Leo, but it only really comes out when I'm with friends because it's in the 11th house. It's really interesting. I'm like a different person when I feel safe, right? The moon is what we need to feel safe. And I feel it now as I'm speaking. I'm not speaking about it. It's like, here comes the moon in Leo. We're all complex, right? As human beings, we all have these very different sides, and it's shown by the location and the placement of all the different planets in our chart. And so, yeah, there's this really quite shy and the part of me that just wants to hide and never be seen by anybody, which is the Virgo and the Pluto Saturn. And then there's the moon in Leo that I just spoke about. And there's also this interesting polarity in, Sun Virgo. I used to be a computer programmer, right? And total skeptic about everything, like everything. Part of my support job, fixing bugs, was like scanning lines of code looking for a missing full stop. Period, to you Americans. And I loved that. I was good at that, right? The detail and I could find missing full stops. But the Virgoan side and the sort of skeptical, rational, analytical side, and actually this is probably also sort of the Mercury conjunct Pluto, my mind, I was quite nihilistic, quite dark thoughts, and always see the worst, and kind of like what's the point of anything, right? I had that side, just like I'm just gonna die, really, I would often contemplate that. It's why do anything? Because I'm just gonna die. I was really aware of death from a young age. I'm not sure why, but this actually, I do know why, and that's a story for another time. It's an interesting story that involves astrology. So I've always had this kind of quite dark, nihilistic side, and at the same time, despite being a total skeptic, something in me, I just had this faith, I suppose is the word I would use. Faith in something I didn't understand. And I remember being in my office when I was a computer programmer in my late 20s, right at my Saturn returns, actually. And I didn't know anything about astrology then. And I remember sitting and looking around my office and just being this can't be it. This can't be all there is to life. And I didn't believe in anything else. But at the same time, there was this, there has to be something else, more meaning, more something. And it's everyone else seems quite content with this, the mortgage and the job and the kind of normal 9-to-5 life. And it terrified me. And this this sort of longing and faith in something I didn't understand, and seeking something and I didn't know what I was seeking. And I really see that in my chart as both the Jupiter in Pisces, very much about faith, I would say, and also the Neptune in Sag, conjunct my North Node, right? This sort of spiritual quest when I didn't even know what that was or what that meant. Which kind of got me through a lot, actually. My life's often been this strange polarity of nihilism and faith.
I mean, that's a very interesting way to go through life with a Mercury Libra. You're kind of balancing two seemingly opposing worldviews. Those two things, nihilism, if you really examine it closely, should on the surface be completely at odds with the idea of faith. Mm-hmm. And yet somehow those two things seem to kind of teeter-totter in your life.
Yeah. I mean, I have both. I kind of see them as different aspects of myself. And it's a choice, actually, often these days, of I could choose still quite easily to go down the path of the dark thoughts and what's the point, and have you seen the state of the world and humanity? What is the point? My God. And I can also step into this part of me that just marvels in the beauty and the magnificence and the utter mystery of I'm alive and I'm here, and how did that happen? And one day I won't be, and wow. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, as you've gotten older, has the balance of those two experiences changed?
Oh yeah. Oh, totally. Not totally. Massively. I would say in my younger years, I was like 90 something percent of the dark, everything's fucked, I'm fucked. And now there's more balance. But it's like something like I know I've tasted enough of something beyond this physical material world being solely identified as this human form to know that there's more. I still don't know what it is, but the faith is much stronger in me for sure, and feels a lot better. Have you noticed? It's like it feels so much better to choose to have a optimistic perspective.
Yeah. I mean, I think you and I are both people who went from a lot of darkness earlier on in our lives to being able to really enjoy and feel alive. Like, you know, we've only known each other for 12 years, and I'm sure earlier you had done a lot of healing before I met you, but like both of us feel a lot more alive. You know, it seems like the transition from that, you know, fixated darkness into trusting whatever life is.
Says the man sitting in a Pluto t-shirt.
The path for me and the path for you was like, we had to go through that underworld in order to really find something worth living for.
You know, you've just reminded me that I had all kinds of like really intense Pluto transits and progressions at the time. Also at my Saturn returns when my own life imploded, exploded. And yeah, like that beginning entrance into the underworld that, you know, it was grim for a very long time. But like you were saying, it really, you know, Pluto, if we're willing to go there, to really descend into the underworld, what it offers is something completely different, right? It's like you don't come out of a Plutonian experience a little bit better. You come out completely destroyed and something new emerges from that.
I think it's Pluto is something that I've spent a lot of time looking at and experiencing. And one of the things that I've noticed in life is that, like people in my life, is that when they go through a Plutonian experience, everyone has the old thing decimated, but not everyone rebuilds from the new thing. There is a path where Pluto takes you into the underworld and you just descend and continue down that path. But, you know, the people who can give up what was there before really build something much better. Like, you are a much happier guy than you were when I met you. Like, it doesn't, anybody, if they'd met you 12 years ago, had a 5-minute conversation with you, and then spent 5 minutes with you now, you feel like a completely different person. Like much lighter and happier and able to just experience, you know, something like even with just astrology, like the amount that you love astrology now is much more easy to feel when you talk about it than it was when we first started, you know, when you first started teaching me.
That reminds me of a story that I want to share, a quick story that ties into what you're saying, because one of the big challenges in my life has been feeling, right? Like for most of my life, like I had zero access to any of my feelings. I was so disconnected from them. And I don't have a huge amount of water in my chart, right? Feelings and emotions are the water signs, Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. And I have this Jupiter in Pisces, right? Which is, Jupiter rules Pisces, right? You'd look at that and you'd be like, oh, that's good, right? That's good. That's a planet in its rulership. It's a really powerful force, but I was totally disconnected from it. And symbolically, how that showed up is it's on the descendant, right? It's like planets over there, this part of the chart, can be energies that we disown or that we put onto other people. And so I was looking for somebody to save me, right? Jupiter in Pisces, the savior, but it was always out there. Who's going to save me? Nobody, as it turned out.
Which is the best thing that could have happened.
Yeah, and the really fun story, I think it's fun, is one time I sat down with the person who introduced me to astrology, and I wanted to talk about my chart with him. And I wanted to talk about Jupiter because I was like, this is really interesting to me. I don't quite know what it means. And I sat down in his apartment and I think I had a printout of my chart. And I sat down and I said, so, Jupiter. And the second I said Jupiter, I moved my foot and I kicked over a glass of water by my foot. And it went everywhere. I mean, it's only water, it was fine. But, let's not over dramatize it. But the person I was speaking with, he picked up on the symbolism of that. That was like a literal physical embodiment of what I wanted to talk about. He's like, oh, pushing the water away. Like I kicked the glass of water away from me. And he's like, yeah, Jupiter, there it is, the water planet, the planet in the water sign. On your descendant, you're like pushing it away, you're disowning it. So then, it's been a long journey of actually reclaiming, contacting my water. Like there is water there, but I've been disconnected from it. And yeah, it's been that journey of learning to feel and going through a lot of grief and many other not always fun feelings. It's been that journey of reconnecting with my water that has brought this aliveness, that has brought more joy, and that's how it shows up astrologically in my chart. There's that Jupiter in Pisces. Anyway, enough about me. Let's talk about you, Cam. And I'm curious about your journey to becoming an astrologer, because it's not something. I don't think generally we sit down at like age 18 with a career advisor and they're like, have you thought of being an astrologer? It's a great career choice.
Yeah, it's a great question. I will start out by saying that I did not want to be an astrologer. I had no interest in it. I didn't think astrology was real. I thought people who left their fate up to the stars were stupid and ignorant about how life worked. And I worked in IT, had a very logical. I have Mercury and Virgo on the midheaven, so I had a very logical cause and effect related relationship with life, and that everything was just kind of atoms bumping together. And the thing that brought me to astrology was really desperation. I think a lot of astrologers go to astrology just trying to really just unfuck their lives. Like, I had been experiencing erection problems at that point for, I don't know, something like 3 years. And I didn't believe in astrology at all, but like I'd seen you I'd been around you quite a lot. We'd started to spend some time together, and I kind of teased you about astrology. I don't know how much you remember about that, but I kind of made fun of you about it a little bit. And then I eventually was just like, well, whatever I'm doing now isn't working, so let me see what happens. And I got a reading from you. and you didn't say like, hey, are you having sexual problems? But you sort of like gently massaged around that idea enough that you were the first person that I ever told that I had this, and it was a very confusing experience for me because I didn't understand how astrology could show something like that in my life. Like, I don't know what I was expecting going into the reading. I think I was just kind of like so desperate I was willing to try anything. But you just saw something in the chart that was being reflected in my actual experience, and that was sort of like a moment that like flipped for me, where I basically understood at that moment that I did not understand how reality worked. Like, I didn't know how it worked from there, but what I understood at that moment is that my model of how things work is wrong. I started pestering you with emails, and eventually you were just asking you questions, and I was like obsessing off internet searches, and eventually you're just like, hey, do you want to do a lesson? And I was like, yeah. And I think that when I found astrology, to some degree, the best way I can describe the experience of it, it was because I also had a weird relationship with darkness and faith. I had a weird relationship with religion because I went to Catholic schools, and they kind of turned me into an atheist. And astrology sort of like ignited this something in me that I hadn't felt since I was a kid. And it felt a lot like a guy wandering through the desert finally coming to an oasis. And it was like I just wanted as much as I could get. And it's transformed every part of my life. I think one of the things that I am so thankful for is that like I look at a lot of modern astrology, and I know we're going to talk about this in a later episode, but I just see so many people who are interested in astrology, and it's almost like entertainment for them. But for me, it wasn't. It was something where I realigned the parts of my life that weren't working with what astrology said would work. And I watched how that just made every part of my life better. It's not like I don't have problems, but it's like, I think one of the things that astrology is really good at that is not that, you can kind of hear it if you listen to astrologers talk, but I don't feel like the message really gets through, is that it's a map to show you what you look like when you're healthy. And if you try to earnestly move towards that, it can have a really profound impact on your life. And the thing I'm really thankful about is that you're the guy I learned astrology from, and not somebody who, it would have been very easy for me to just turn it into an intellectual thing. I love stuff like that. I like a silly thing. I really enjoy the idea of me becoming a beekeeper, but I can tell you, I don't want to do the hard work that's required to be a beekeeper. But the idea of it's really fun. It's like entertainment in my mind for me to think about. Luckily, that's not what happened for me, and I'm really thankful for that. So that's how I found astrology. I found you.
The phrase I'm hearing in my head as you're speaking is, it's not out there. And what I mean is, one of the key things about astrology is what relationship we have with it. And as you speak, what it brings up in me what I hear a lot of people when they talk about astrology is it's something out there, and it's a bit nebulous, and it's this thing happening, and next year when the planets align, like things are going to get better, or whatever. And it's not out there, it's in us, it is us. The planets are symbols for aspects of our nature, and it's like, as humans, we sit at the intersection of spirit and matter, right? And astrology comes from the spirit world or the unseen world, and it wants to flow through us, and we have to embody the symbolism and live it in our lives to be the people we really came here to be, and for the changes in the world that so many of us long for to start happening, right? It's not just going to somehow magically happen as Neptune moves into Aries or whatever. It happens through individual people. And, you know, you don't have to use astrology. It's just one tool, right? There's other embodiment practices and other ways of getting more deeply in touch with ourselves. But it's a really, really, really powerful tool, especially during those times when we're not sure, when we don't have the clarity of what's the right thing to do. And that happens to everyone at some point in their lives. And it's like, is this right for me? And there it is, you know, in the symbolism. And yeah, that gets me excited, that sense of embodying the reason we came here, right? You know, I really like the word soul a lot these days. I really touches something in me. It's like, why did our soul come here? We came from somewhere. I don't know where, no idea, but I came from somewhere, and I'm going somewhere after this. And while I'm here, each person has their own unique gifts, challenges, path to walk. And I don't know any better, clearer system for explaining how each person is and the key themes than astrology. I feel like just sharing, like one little example that comes to mind of like the specificity of astrology. Like it can be used in so many different ways. But I'm having a memory of doing a written report for somebody's child. So it's one of the forms of astrology readings I do of like key things that I can see in a child's chart, and it's very different to doing an adult's chart reading. You know, it's less interactional, relational, but it can be really valuable. And I remember this child had this really prominent. They were a Gemini, and they had Mercury in Gemini in really close aspect to Uranus. I think maybe they had Mercury square Uranus. But yeah, this really prominent, and it was on an angle, this Mercury in Gemini, close aspect with Uranus and child. And I was like, I don't think your child would do so well in like mainstream education. You know, they have this brilliant mind, right? Mercury in Gemini is already a fast mind. Throw in Uranus and it's like electrified, and it's somebody who thinks outside the box, right? Different ways of thinking, unique ideas, different ideas. And they're going to be bored senseless, I would imagine, at school in a, you know, the traditional school system. And I didn't really know anything about this child, but I was like, just throwing this out there in case it resonates. And the mother came back to me and was like, oh my God, thank you. That's what I've been feeling and sensing. And yes, like we were already discussing this very thing, and it was confirmation. And that's often the way with astrology, right? It's sometimes it's something that comes out of the blue. Often it is also confirmation of something we think or suspect, or is this right? And you know, what a big thing and a really concrete thing to use astrology for, to make a decision about the kind of education that your child is going to have.
That's the confirmation thing is, I think that's the best way to do. My wording of it wasn't that, but that's exactly what I experienced. Is like, I would look at my chart and say, yeah, that's exactly what I want, when we would have conversations about it. And also, as just as a confirmation, I have Mercury very closely square Uranus. And I did terribly in traditional education because I was bored. I was very bored. And I went through traditional education, and I spent the whole time getting in trouble because, I constantly heard about how smart I was, but how I didn't apply myself. And it's because I hated school. I felt I wanted nothing more than for school to be over, because I didn't want to learn about, the French Revolution or, some battle that took place, 250 years ago. Like, that wasn't interesting to me.
So I think that's a good place to wrap up this first episode and to say what's coming up next. So next episode, I really want to dive more deeply into what astrology is and what we're doing as astrologers. How does this thing work? What is this magical mystery thing called astrology? And I may get into themes of astrology as ritual and divination, and we are communing with spirits, I think, when we're practicing astrology. At least I am. That's how I work with it. So I want to talk more about that and tell some more stories, some more real world, practical, and hopefully fun stories about astrology in our actual real human lives. So please, if you have enjoyed this episode and you haven't already, please do subscribe. Leave a comment if you like. Let us know how it's been, if you've enjoyed it, what you thought of it. And tell your friends. Tell your enemies. Tell the bloke down the pub. Share this with people, anyone who you think may be interested in it. Please spread the word. And yeah, thank you, Cam. It's been a real pleasure to share this first episode with you. And any final words before we wrap up?
I just wanted to thank you for having me on. It's been amazing. It's always nice to spend time with you, but this is a really meaningful thing for me because I think astrology has just played such a big part of my life. And as soon as you told me you were doing it, I was like, let me in. I want in. And so for anyone who's listening, I want to just kind of end by sharing that Mark really just changed the direction of my life. And so if you are interested in astrology and you're struggling with something in your life and it's difficult, just know that like there's ways that this art can take your life in a direction that you couldn't have imagined. And Mark's a really great guy to help you with that. So if you are even, considering a reading, do it with him. And I'm not promising it'll change your life, but the way it did mine, but it's one of those things where you can't imagine what can come out of it. Because most people dramatically underestimate what can show up in a chart, and they dramatically underestimate that part of it that is something that's coming from the spiritual world that gives us what we need in that exact moment. So get a reading from Mark. He's amazing. And watch all of our episodes.
Thank you, Cam. That's really touching. Appreciate those words. Okay, so blessings to you, my friend. I hope you have a great week. And let's do this again soon. And thank you all for watching and listening. And please come back again. Bye for now.